Hey YouTube, Time Itself here, playing some of the Division. I got about 10 hours into the open beta, figured I'd offer some thoughts on it at this point. I would agree with the description that this is really Destiny in third person with a modern military theme. It's got a lot of the same ideas going on as Destiny. At the same time, you could say it's kind of like Borderlands, just without the, air quotes, humor. It's a shooter with heavy focus on RPG kind of progression and upgrades, and in fact the same kind of hooks that MMOs use to try and get you to play more. That whole gear and XP treadmill, but that should be more an excuse to play rather than the reason to play. Very first impression, and probably accurately, is this looks like a fairly normal third-person modern military shooter, right up until you try to start killing people and realize, hey, that takes a lot of bullets, and numbers pop out of people when you shoot them, like Borderlands and Destiny. Being a COD and Battlefield fan, at first this really bothered me, but I started to think about it and realized, well, maybe that makes it a little more tactical without making it super stressful. And that might be okay. It really depends on how the maps and the enemies and all the abilities, skills or whatever they're going to call them, play out. Is it useful to slow down the game so that you can have time to make some more informed or interesting decisions? If everything's over instantly, that limits the possibilities. Maybe this makes for some more. You get pinned down and you're exchanging gunfire and one of your teammates can come over and help you out. On the other hand, maybe it means you're constantly getting pinned down behind cover because you can't kill the enemies fast enough and they always just suppress you with gunfire. If that's how it plays out, that's no good. It's like how if the best strategy is just to go level up and get a bigger gun, that's not a very interesting game. For example, the weapon variety we saw in the beta was fairly typical for a modern military shooter, and they actually did have a range of performance, anything from your shotgun, submachine gun, assault rifle, battle rifle, the fairly typical modern military shooter weapon selection. Nothing quite as interesting as Destiny or especially Borderlands. But there were also skills, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out. If it's just going to be like Destiny, oh, everybody's got a super, for the most part, whatever. Or if it's going to be really critical to build a squad around having an appropriate mix of those skills. Now in the beta, what do they have? 4 skills available? And there were a whole lot more going to be in the final game. Is that because they're not very important, or because they didn't really want to have to deal with everyone figuring out how they worked in the beta? Or did they really want to avoid just making the grind that's going to be in the final game so obvious by just giving away all those skills in the beta super easy so that people could try them out? Because they want to make people play a long time in order to unlock all the stuff in the game. But let's keep going on variety. Enemy variety. They actually have lots of guys who just kind of stand there and try and shoot at you, of course, but there are also some melee guys, and given how much health they have, sometimes that can be a bit intimidating having someone rushing you. Then there's the melee guys with the shields, and it's kind of okay at this point, it makes sense. Then they pull out the guys with guns and flamethrowers, so pull out the flamethrowers when they get closer, and oh, okay, this is getting more interesting, now you have to play a little smarter. There are also some snipers around, lots of scope glint giving them away. Further on, in some of the higher level areas of the dark zone, they had some bigger, nastier flamethrower guys who didn't have guns. No, they slowly walked toward you, kind of tank flamethrower guys. That was a bit intimidating and made for a couple tense moments that I kind of enjoyed. One of the issues that long time to kill helps hide and sort of deal with, but not really, is I think we've gotten to this point, we're calling it netcode. And you probably noticed it a couple times in the footage already, but, well, there can be 200 milliseconds between when the last bullet from a magazine leaves my gun and the guy I was shooting at fall over dead. And that's assuming that the last bullet from my gun was what killed the guy. Maybe I had a couple bullets left when I fired the fatal shot. Now, part of that is probably the lower frame rate. When I look through my footage, it looks like it's running at 30 FPS, which is the same as Destiny. That amount of delay is not going to feel good in multiplayer, but it might be considered normal enough. In single player, though, it's gonna make it a lot worse. And the game does not feel as good when it takes that long for the enemies you're trying to kill to fall over dead after you've killed them. In a lot of games, that ends up being at least partly client-side, so the guy looks like he falls over dead on your screen, even though the multiplayer server hasn't actually confirmed the kill. In single player, that is perfectly fine, and it's going to make it feel so much better. That's one of the things that Destiny did well, is just shooting the aliens in the head felt good, and I don't get quite that same feeling from The Division. Another thing that The Division just doesn't do terribly well is the look sensitivity. I get on this a lot. It's basically, how far you have to move your thumbstick to how fast your guy turns. Call of Duty does this extremely well. Part of the reason is that it's 60 FPS. 30 FPS is harder to do that well. To compensate for this, The Division does what, most games end up doing, and that is give you a fair amount of aim assist. How frustrating you find that is going to vary. I was not a big fan of it in The Division. You notice some of the clips, I'll zoom in with the battle rifle. I got one of the higher power scopes, and this just does not feel terribly good. It works just fine, but quickly acquiring targets, tracking moving targets, it just did not feel terribly good to me. I have to point out, this game is a multiplayer RPG and is so going to have the typical multiplayer RPG issues when you're trying to play with your friends, because you need to all find characters with similar levels or deal with someone being massively over or under leveled. Maybe that doesn't bother you. I kind of don't like that myself. Like I said, I view the progression or the grind as more an excuse to play rather than the reason, and if it's getting in the way of having fun or playing with friends, then it's a problem. That's just me. Like the other shared world shooters, there's no real massive part about this. You don't get that many people in any one server. There is no trading system. Well, I guess you could, if you're in the dark zone and you have contaminated loot that you want to give one of your friends, maybe you could have them kill you? And then you might drop that for them. That seems a lot of work, though. I did also run into a few bugs in the beta. Once in the dark zone, a whole bunch of loot that was on the ground just disappeared. It happened at the same time that another squad was loading in the same area, but it's just not cool to see a bunch of your hard-earned loot just vanish into thin air. I did spot a couple loading bugs, things just not loading in time, the game getting confused about what it should load in, like right here. So that was not too critical, that's just an NPC. Then I used one of these special keys in the dark zone to supposedly get myself and my teammates some loot, but nothing came out of the chest. So kind of wasted key. That's going to piss some people off, I'm sure. Now, that's just what I spotted playing my 10 hours in the beta. 2 of those instances deprived me of quite a bit of loot. And in a loot-centric shooter, I think that's a problem. It seems to me that the areas in The Division fall into one of 3 categories. Your social hubs, where everybody lowers their gun, and it's just like a regular town, and they're kind of shared spaces. Then you've got your campaign areas, or you're just wandering around when you're solo, where friendly fire is off, nobody's going to shoot you, and in fact, I don't think for the most part you're going to see other players running around. Maybe that's me. Then you've got the dark zone, which is basically the same thing, except somebody left friendly fire on, and there's this system for deciding who's gone rogue and needs to be punished for shooting other players. And they don't put enough enemies into the dark zone, and so everybody ends up kind of encouraged to try and take on other players, just as giving you something to do. But that leads to the question, why would anybody want to go into the dark zone other than to shoot other humans and just kind of mess around with each other? Why not just have a regular PvP mode at that point? And The Division's motivation is loot. It's a loot-centric shooter. That makes sense. So there'll be some enemies around, some boss-level enemies, and some large clusters here and there that will respawn occasionally, and you can go and try and kill them. The thing is, they don't respawn very fast, and so, players just kind of wander around and look for those AI to kill, and kind of try to either, piss off the other humans that are in the dark zone, or try to avoid them. Now the thing is, loot you pick up in the dark zone is contaminated by the virus that's caused the apocalypse, and so it has to be extracted by helicopter at one of the evac points on a timer, and this is another way to draw players together. The thing is, you can only take out 6 contaminated items at a time on the helicopter, and there are only space for 4 players to put stuff on the helicopter. So that obviously means you're regularly calling in the helicopters to extract your loot out so you can actually do something with it. Thing is, you have to go back to your base to pick up your decontaminated loot, and there are only 30 slots available in this container. You get where this is going? So as a player, if you're extracting lots of loot, you're going to have to regularly leave your dark zone to go back and empty this out to deal with all your junk and not just keep playing. And it can be kind of a pain in the butt. Okay, and next, while I said the motivation for players shooting each other in the dark zone was that there just weren't enough enemies and they were bored, and I think that's the primary reason, supposedly you're supposed to be after the other player's loot. You can see them running around with a little yellow bag on the bottom of their backpack that lets you know they have some loot. If you want to kill them, try and take their loot, and then extract that loot, you can do that. No guarantees their loot is any good, however. And that'll also mean you go rogue, and other players may try to kill you because they'll get more points for killing you and you'll lose more points if you get killed while you're rogue. It's kind of a mess, and in fact, most of the time when you go rogue, it's accidental. You hit somebody with some explosives, or you got in a longer range firefight, or some bullets went where you weren't meaning them to. It's kind of accidental, and then someone will see that timer over your head, and it might only be 20 seconds, not a minute or more. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm gonna kill this guy because he accidentally put some bullets in somebody." Look, I think having a game mode where friendly fire is on and you can possibly pick up other players' loot, even though that's not your major motivation for killing them, I think the results of that decision are fairly self-evident. If you jump into the dark zone, you really should know what you're getting into. It's not a surprise. But fortunately, this is something that they can tune based on how much extra XP you get when you kill someone who's gone rogue, or how much extra you lose for going rogue, or how fast that rogue timer ticks up for damage you've done. That's going to be something they dial in as players really figure out the game. I'm not too worried about that. What is a giant pain is trying to deal with that loot. In a loot-centric shooter, this shouldn't be hard, and yet you're running around the dark zone and you're thinking, okay, I only want to really pick up stuff that's actually, what I want or is pretty good, and yet if you want to go up and compare what's, something you've earned that's dropped on the ground to what's currently equipped on your character, there's no easy way to do that. And of course, you're in the dark zone, so you got other humans who might decide to just come along and see you standing there not doing anything and decide to really screw up your day. Have fun with that. On the bright side, the game does have some basic matchmaking. Not looking for group level stuff, and you can't really organize it like that, but it will get you in with some other human players, so you're not just completely outnumbered, especially in these dark zone things where running around solo can be asking to be horribly murdered. While the first couple groups I got into just randomly disbanded, I finally got into one where the three other guys were talking and everything went great. I was so sick I could barely speak, but playing was good and we had a good time leveling up and getting a lot of gear in the dark zone. I can see where this is going after the multiplayer survival genre kind of thing, DayZ. I'm not sure if they're going to get the same appeal. I don't know if this is really going to keep players coming back. It's partly the encounters that they arrange when you're actually just fighting the AI and not trying to stab other human players in the back. I'm not sure how well those encounters are going to go. My time in the beta, it got fairly repetitive, killing the same AI in the same places, going back to these same extraction points. There were 2 or 3 different spots that seemed pretty good, but it was just doing that over and over again. In the free roam areas, what would be explorable areas kind of in Destiny, the population got kind of sparse. I know they're going for the post-apocalyptic theme, but it's just not terribly interesting. It's like Assassin's Creed without all the NPCs around. Of course, you don't have to try and hide among them, but it's just kind of less interesting when they're just piles of garbage everywhere. Occasionally you come across civilians or looters, but for the most part you're just trying to make your way around the city, and the GPS, sometimes it seems like it takes you the long way around, and there gets to be quite a bit of just running on the ground. Think about playing Destiny without the Sparrow. How much fun would that be? I got a little confused as to how I was starting up, adding more side missions to my map. If I went to the right NPC, it might start a quest chain. If I went to some bulletin board, it seemed like it might load in some more side events, a hostage rescue, or just some little thing that I can go do on the map on my way between more major events. But eventually I ran out of things to do. I'm not sure if I just didn't find the right place to refresh my inventory of side activities, or I really just ran out. And so I wound up with a big part of the city that I just had to run through to get between points. Yes, there is some fast travel, but it's not terribly fast because of the longer loading times. So I just had a bunch of map I had to run through occasionally. What's the point of that? The actual story missions, that seemed to be constructed a little better. Level requirements, of course, might be an issue, it could be too high or too low, but when I finally got in there and started doing those, they seemed decently designed, and for the most part, I just got to kill a lot of bad guys. I have to wonder how it would go if I had more teammates with me. I bet it would ramp up the difficulty, and things might get even more interesting. Though I did run into one super bullet spongy boss that reminded me of Destiny a little too much, but the easy solution was to bug out his AI, so he just stood there and let me shoot him until he died. Good thing I didn't run out of ammo first. After playing the beta, my conclusion for the release of the game is wait and see. I want to see what people do with 50-60 hours in the game once they've got almost everything unlocked. Do the skills and weapons and some of the abilities on the weapons make things more interesting, or is it just a bigger numbers game? Can you do some interesting things with the skills and the encounters when you get a larger squad together, or is it just a corridor shooter for you and your friends in third person? Because some of the weapon upgrades, they give numerical values, and there'll be a half a percentage point difference. And, okay, that's great. You got a half percentage point better accuracy. You need to go swap out those attachments on your gun. Yeah, maybe it makes the difference, but I don't really want to care that much. I just want to go have fun shooting things. Come on. I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope this has been informative, useful. I know I haven't been posting on the channel recently. I just haven't been playing games. Haven't felt like it. My regular team hasn't been playing as much either. It hasn't been happening. So without playing games, it just means I'm not making videos. That's how it goes. Again, thanks for watching, and I will catch you later.